Hello, my name is Bryn Thomas and I'm a partner in the agricultural team at Harris & Clark Rickaby's based in the Cardiff office. We have here with us today Sarah Carr, who is head of Farm491 at the Alliston Centre in Cirencester. Hi Sarah, thank you very much for being with us.
Hi Bryn, thank you for having me.
Today's session is all about AgriTech startups, which we're going to talk about with Sarah. Why talk about it? Well, it's all about how we can become a part of the solution, not the problem. The adoption of new technologies in areas like food production will be essential for hitting net zero targets, something which many businesses, not just in agriculture, but across the corporate world, including here at HCR, are committed to. HCR have previously worked with Sarah and Farm491, perhaps most recently and notably in our AgriTech zone at the Royal Three Counties show. The dedicated zone connected farmers and agricultural businesses with the organisations, bodies and academics who provide the research, funding and development for cutting edge technology, machinery and equipment for the farming industry. So Sarah, how would you summarise your role at Farm491 in terms of actually what you do within the space?
Absolutely. So my role as head of Farm491 really is to make sure that we're staying at the forefront of agri-tech innovation. So, speaking to the right businesses, the right startups, and the right partners as well. So whether that's people like yourselves, or other corporates or other incubators as well. So making sure that, we're hot in the space, basically, we know what's going on, and we're providing the right support as well, because I think it's an industry that's constantly changing. And so we need to make sure that the support we're providing is constantly changing too. And at Farm491, we have a team of 7 business advisors who provide that one-to-one support, whether that's around raising investment, strategy, branding, and obviously that information can change regularly. So it's just making sure that, we're at the top of our game as well, so that we can support entrepreneurs as best as possible.
Okay, and it's quite an active space at the moment, isn't it? And
absolutely.
In terms of that, what does it mean to start up an agri-tech business specifically in food production?
Yeah, I think so. For me, the term agri-tech, it can be quite misleading because a lot of people will instantly assume you mean tech that is only on farm, and it does go across the whole food supply chain. So, to start up an agri-tech business from my point of view and from Farm491's point of view it's anything that's innovative within food and farming. So that could be on farm, it could be beyond that, it could be further down the food supply chain, but it's anything that means we can be farming more efficiently, producing food more efficiently, obviously in a climate friendly way, and also if we can by producing more and improving bottom lines as well. I think that's really important to note as well.
Okay, and the specific challenges in terms of what startups experience, businesses, entrepreneurs, in terms of the way they come to you for support, what challenges would you say that there are in essence, in the main?
I'd say one of the biggest ones is raising investment, definitely. There are different pools available. We've got VCs, we've got angels. There are more specific funds out now that are sort of linked to agri-tech and food tech. But there is that sort of missing middle SME where you're you're not early enough to get that early stage funding, and you're not established enough to get that later stage funding. So you kind of sit in that gap in the middle, and there isn't always that support available. So a lot of the companies that come to us, it really is help with raising investment. And then I'd say the other one is having someone to speak to. It can be quite a lonely world being an entrepreneur. Not everybody has a full team around them. And so they have the support from us as a team. We'll bang their drum, we'll shout out about them as much as we can, and just be a sounding board, if anything, as well. Okay,
there does seem to be quite a bit more funding coming through from the government, though, in terms of commitments. That's presumably helping the position quite substantially.
It's really good to see the government actually being more active in the space, and both for farmers and for entrepreneurs as well. So there's definitely more opportunities coming about. I do think that since COVID, it made a lot of different stakeholders a lot more aware about the impact of food and farming. And so I personally do think it sort of moved further up the agenda, which is really good.
Yeah, good. And the innovation space that you have, it's built on some key values for the agricultural sector. Can you explain a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, of course. So we have three core values or sort of pillars around what we do and how we support our businesses as well. And the first one is empowering farmers. We think it's really important, right from the early stages of setting up your business to be engaging with farmers. So if this is going to be a tech that is used for farmers on farm, they need to feel empowered that, they can use this, that they even need this or want this. All too many times we come across companies who assume that a farmer is going to use this tech, and it creates a lot of adoption barriers. They haven't engaged with the farmers, so they don't actually know what they need. And so that's why we find that really important. And the second is building climate resilience. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Obviously, we're going through a lot of climate change issues, and every sector has part to play in that. But obviously the sort of focus around agriculture is quite high. So really ensuring that we can be reaching those net zero targets or climate friendly ways of farming or producing food. And pretty much all of the startups we work with have that sort of net zero impact in mind. And then the third and final one is empowering consumers. So really similar to empowering farmers, I think consumers really want to know a lot more these days about where their food is coming from. And so it's important that they feel empowered to make those decisions on what they're eating. And so it's, the way that you can do that as a business is, again, like with the farmers, engaging consumers early on, finding out what the trends are, what it is they'd be looking for. And yeah, it's just making sure that people can make those choices on their own.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, I think food provenance and security is absolutely essential, isn't it? And it's been brought to the fore with COVID, particularly in terms of the supply chain as well.
Absolutely.
So supporting the future generation of farmers is obviously important. But what about the existing farmers? How are emerging food techs engaging with the more traditional farming members of the community?
Yeah, so that kind of links to what I was just saying, really, about how you really need to be getting on farm and getting these farmers involved in that tech early on. I think a common misconception is that the farmer needs to know the full ins and outs of the technology. That's not true. Some farmers will. Some farmers, they don't want to know that. They just want to know what it's going to do for them. And as long as it shows some sort of actionable insight at the end, then that's all that's really important. So yeah, the more traditional farmers that might not be adopting as much technology, I think we need to stop seeing it as something that is so far off in the future. Like, it is now AgriTech. People are adopting it more and more. Farmers have been innovating for years, whether they think that's AgriTech or not. They are so innovative. And so, I mean, I'm probably guilty of it too. We use the word future, the future of food. I've probably said it during this already. But I think by using that word with AgriTech, it sounds like that is something that will happen eventually in the future. Might be a bit daunting. It all seems a bit brand new and techy, but actually it can be so subtle just to feed in now. And, it's things like tractors are already having, all this new technology included in them. And you might not think that is AgriTech because it's pretty standard, but it is. And so, yeah, it's just appealing to the traditional farmers by making it seem less daunting and just making sure that they have a full understanding of how to use it, if they even need to know how to use it, and what benefit they'll get from it in the end.
Yes, it's that sort of usability aspect, isn't it, in terms of the farmer properly understanding the on-farm practical effect of what's being developed.
Yeah, exactly.
And how are food techs working towards net zero? What specific innovations are you seeing? Any notable ones?
Yeah, really good question. We definitely are seeing so many more businesses focusing on this whole carbon footprint piece. I think that's been, a buzzword for a very, very, very long time, but actually seeing companies that are now working with the likes of supermarkets, farmers, consumers. So an example would be, there's a company, a startup called Mondra, and they're one of our members, and they essentially develop a data-driven insight platform for big food players, so like supermarkets, and it helps the supermarkets to meet their carbon goals. And so I believe their product measures the full carbon life cycle of each product. So let's say it's a block of cheese or something, and it can tell the supermarket what their carbon emissions are, how much biodiversity loss there's been, what water usage was included in creating that product. And so the supermarket has a clearer understanding, and therefore it creates a benchmark, which I think is important in this industry because it's all quite new and there aren't always those benchmarks available. So we don't know what good looks like. So if the supermarkets can, start getting involved in this and show us, okay, this is what good looks like, we now have something to work towards. So yeah, that's an example of a company who as well probably ticks off a few of those pillars that we were talking about, and getting consumers on board and farmers whilst also speaking to supermarkets is quite a big deal. It's quite difficult to get into all of those different sectors.
Yeah, because there are a lot of partners, stakeholders, aren't there? And there's groups involved essentially. So it's tying them together and communicating.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of AgriTech then in terms of where we're going?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to grow. I think it's been growing so quickly over the past couple of years, and I think that will continue. But I really hope to see a lot more integration. There are still companies coming up with really exciting innovations, but realistically, say if we're talking about farmers, if they want to use this tech, they're not going to want to buy 10 different sets of technology that don't all speak to each other, don't all work together, and then therefore they're actually creating more work for themselves by reading 10 different data sets or getting 10 different results. So I think the future of AgriTech, it just needs to be more streamlined, and there needs to be that open communication between the different stakeholders, like we just said. So I think if we can see more action between consumers, stakeholders, supermarkets, and farmers, that would be ideal.
I mean, as you said before, we've been innovating for years and years, but we really seem, from my point of view, to be in a real key spot at the moment for developments in terms of funding coming through as well. So we're spiking in terms of what we're seeing. Yeah,
totally would agree. I think for us, in terms of Farm491, we've always seen sort of a steady membership, but definitely since COVID, there's been a spike in how many startups there are and how many of them are really trying to tackle some of these big issues. So it's a really exciting space to be in, definitely.
Okay. And what would be your top tips for startups in AgriTech, essentially?
I think my biggest top tip would absolutely be to know your customer. And I know that sounds really basic, and it's very similar to what I've said already in this, but if a farmer is your customer, get to know them. If a consumer is your customer, get to know them. I think the value of market research just needs to be fully understood. I've just met too many startups who have made some big assumptions about their customer or who they think their customer is, and actually their customer is different to their end user often. And they make these big assumptions and they just can't grow, they can't get past that barrier. And so, yeah, absolutely know your customers. And then the other top tip I would give is just to stay agile. So, it's really important to be having your business plans, know what your strategy is for the next few years, but being able to be agile to anything that will change in the industry, to be flexible, to pivot. As we know from a lot of situations we've seen over the years in farming, you cannot predict anything. So you can have your business plan in place, which is fantastic, and have your mission, your vision, your values, but be prepared to have to change things quickly as well to make it work.
Sarah, some really interesting material and comment from you there, both in terms of the role specifically played by Farm491 and also the wider issues that you've touched on. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continued working in partnership between Harrison Clark Rickaby's and Farm491 within the technology and innovation space. We hope everyone's found this session both helpful and thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thank you.